How's it going, y'all? Welcome to the first official episode of the Bioarc podcast. And I'm filming this separately because I feel like my introduction was weak, especially for the immense gratitude that I have for my first guest, Dr. Stephen Durost. He was beyond generous and kind with his time. It's super valuable. The fact that he was willing to work with me and just go through the process of being on the podcast and keeping up with emails and everything. Again, it's says a lot about his character and what he stands for. So if I didn't say it already, go check him out. C.R.E.A.T.E. The website is official, CastleCreate.com. He does awesome therapy, working with art to help heal people. And you'll see throughout this podcast the way that he talks about it and the way he talks about his journey. Just super humble. You wouldn't know. I didn't know really, any of his background when we first met. And the more I learn about him, the more impressed. And I'm glad to have him as a friend and a companion, especially in the sport that we both compete in. And I'm looking forward to more conversations over time. So again, thank you for your time, Stephen. Much appreciated. And let's dive into it. So, first guest, thank you so much, Dr. Stephen Durost, for coming on the podcast Bioarc. It's a pleasure to have you. I appreciate you showing up.
It's great to be here. I'm pleased to be here again and sharing on your podcast. It's very exciting.
Appreciate that. So I want to do a little brief introduction. Plenty of accolades to mention. So please bear with me here, and hopefully I don't skip over anything that is very meaningful to you, because I know that you worked a long time on achieving what you have, especially with C.R.E.A.T.E, which is your counseling center that you now have, from what I remember, have 2 locations at this point. Working with over 25 counselors. It's art-based therapy. And this is all in New Hampshire, as far as, right, both of your locations?
Correct.
Yes.
Correct. Manchester, New Hampshire, and Londonderry, New Hampshire.
So yes, and his expertise ranges from sexual abuse, responding, whether that's human trafficking or something along the lines of family and those types of things, as well as just therapy with international expressive art therapy, using some of that, from what I understand, to help guide people through the trauma that they've experienced in their past.
Correct. Our centers create the Center for Expressive Arts Therapy and Education, and we do regular mental health counseling as well as art-based therapies, and a lot focused on trauma recovery and for people of all ages and all stages.
And you've spoken in countries around the world, from China, Croatia, Denmark, all over the places.
I'm trained in a form of action-based therapy, a trauma-informed action-based therapy called therapeutic spiral model of psychodrama. So it's a trauma-informed, safe approach to use psychodrama for people who've experienced and survived trauma. So I not only have trained in this, but also I am one of the trainers. And so sometimes I do get to travel and teach people around the world about this particular approach to therapy.
When you say spiral trauma, what does that mean? Because I've heard that term. I don't really understand it quite. So.
Well, the therapeutic spiral model of psychodrama is the basic idea is that you don't just jump into the trauma and work with the trauma right away. You have to first start at the beginning with developing strengths and skills to be able then to go to the trauma. So you spiral down a little and then come back up and work, and then you go back down into it, spiral down some more, spiral back up. until you are able to safely with a client go to the trauma and work on it and come back without being re-triggered. And so we do it very safely and methodically.
Okay. And how did you pick that as your area of expertise that you wanted to focus on?
Yeah, I mean, trauma's always, is kind of fascinating to me how resilient people are, and uh, and that we go through these horrific and unbearable times, and yet we still come back, and sometimes it takes longer than others, and sometimes the body is in overdrive for its protection mechanisms, but with help, we can come back from trauma. And so in the end, when I'm sitting with people, I am sitting with, some of those courageous people I've seen, and I'm sitting with courage every day. And so for me, that's what draws me to this work, is that I get to sit with courage every day. And for me, I'm like, who wouldn't want that?
Yeah. Absolutely. I know it's a great perspective, I think, to have, is like seeing that individual as, like you said, courageous, who's in front of you, taking that first step to heal.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Our systems are amazing, and our bodies are amazing. They want to protect us, and they want to heal. And sometimes it gets stuck, and so working to help get that unstuck is just I don't know. It's always been a very attractive area of therapy for me.
Thank you for sharing. It's a good segue. You brought up the body, because this is again how didn't really get to mention how we met, and we met on stage basically, or about to step on stage for a bodybuilding competition out in Boston. We were both competitors for the Monster Mash WNBF show, and ready to get our, I guess, a registration. That was a super long line, and Stephen was behind me, and we struck up a good conversation, got to know each other a little bit, and yeah, I mean, if you could please tell a little bit about how you got into the sport, and yeah, we can go from there.
Yeah, well, I've for a number of years, I had gone or wanted to go to bodybuilding contests just to see, and eventually I was able to attend one, and then a couple of years later attend another. And I thought to myself, I would really like to compete, and just it's a local competition in New Hampshire, so it wasn't like the world stage or anything. And I thought, this would be really neat. I'd like to. And the years passed, and eventually I was like, okay, so I'm 58, and I better do this soon if I'm going to do this. Like, if I'm going to get this off my life list, I better do it. And so I got a coach. It's like 9 weeks before the competition, and she changed my diet, she changed my exercise, and she said, you had a good gym body but not a good competition body. But she said, in that time I stayed on target, and my why, which I think is really the key piece, is you have to have a why if you're going to do anything, but definitely this was that I wanted to have this story about being 58 and being in my first competition, and getting the medal that said I participated. So that's what I wanted. That was my why. I just wanted the little medallion, and I wanted my nieces and nephews to have a story that they could tell, that their uncle, when he was 58, had his first bodybuilding contest, competed. So I did all the prep, and I did everything, and I got on stage, and actually, surprisingly, I ended up second in the novice category. I ended up second in the 40 and over category, and I won the 50 and over category, which was completely mind-boggling to me. So this became an experience that was even more than the story that I wanted of getting the little participation medal, I ended up with 3 trophies, and and from that also won my pro card
Hell yeah.
because there was enough people in the category that I was able to get my pro card. So, um, and what's amazing, that was at 58, 59, I was able to compete in the world competition, and then again in Boston at the age of 60.
That's yeah. How does that feel after looking back, right? Like just wanting a story, wanting a participation medallion, and coming in and you're seeing like, oh, okay, well, what did I start here? Like, no, what does that feel like?
Yeah, it's still unbelievable. Even when I look at myself and go, I don't look, much like the typical bodybuilder who's got some mass on them, because I came much later to um, to the actual kind of bodybuilding part of it. I've always been fit, but this is a very different level um, of training and such. Uh, and of course, I'm now 60, and I was on the stage this year, with people who are in their 20s, and are and in another category in the 40 and over. Most of the people were under 45, under 50. There was a couple, who were between. I was the oldest guy in the category, um, but it's that's why you have to know your why.
Mm-hmm.
It's like some people might not even have competed um, and said, I'm not going to win. Like, hell, I get to say that I was 14th in the world.
Yeah.
And there were 8 billion people in the world. So that's pretty high up there,
Absolutely. And not to mention, just the amount, just doing a show, right? Like it's
Yeah.
like you said, 8 billion people. I would say probably less than 1% of the population even does a show. Like much less than 1%. We know that.
Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
1.1%.
It's like 0.000001,
Yeah.
one.
So yeah, it's an accomplishment in and of itself, and I love the attitude that you had with it and everything. And did you, when you said because it was part of your story, did any piece, of you say like, as far as like the age, like it was, you're like, before you got on stage and everything, like how was that going into it? Was it like a conversation you had with yourself about it? Like as far as like being an older competitor, like you had mentioned with the younger people, or do you just kept on reminding yourself, or I'm curious.
Yeah, well, I think the kind of almost opposite in some ways is that I just don't see myself as this age.
Okay.
So when I was out on stage doing these things, sometimes, and going back with my coach and kind of like, why didn't I do this, and what was happening here? And I'd have to I'd have to remind myself that, at the time it was 58 or 59 or 60.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to remind myself that, I started really seriously bodybuilding a couple of years ago. And I have to remind myself that, the other people in the competition are, like I was in one category in one of the competitions, and there was a 16-year-old. I mean, I'm not seeing the age difference internally.
Yeah.
But there are just certain things that are going to be preventative. And one of them is the amount of time that I put in compared to someone who's put in 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
But also, what that person will do in 10 years between the age of 30 and 40, and what I will do in 3 years between the ages of 58 and 60,
Yeah.
Um, so, so when I'm out on the stage or going out, I'm giving it what I have, but really just focusing on the moment and saying, I am going to absorb every part of this moment, and I'm going to be in posture, and I am going to smile because this is pretty damn cool.
Hell yeah. Yeah. It's
Mm-hmm.
inspiring, and that's something I love about natural bodybuilding in general is that you can do it's lifelong. right? There's
Mhm.
no, you don't have to worry about anything else because of whatever. It's just like, it's you, training, and food. I mean, that's what it boils down to. So,
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
so uh, how like as a therapist, how has that impacted the way that you see bodybuilding? Because there's especially these days, I think there's a lot more open talk about body dysmorphia, eating
Mhm.
disorders, OCD, just different mental health issues, not only within the general population, but in bodybuilding as well. Like, how do you see it as a therapist?
Yeah, well, I mean, the bodybuilding competitions and just as a, you know, well, the bodybuilding itself does draw people because of its very nature who are prone to eating disorders and body dysmorphia. And it doesn't mean that everyone is doing it, but it does draw that because some of those things are intrinsic in wanting to build up a better body and wanting to there is a healthier way of doing that, but there's also people who get drawn into it because they have an eating disorder and it hides under the guise of being of bodybuilding. And um and it's not that an eating disorder or a compulsion stuff couldn't be used and harnessed in a way that will help the bodybuilder get to their goals. But when the underlying why, when the underlying core to why the person's competing is fueled, if you will, or compulsive because of an eating disorder or an OCD or definitely because of a body dysmorphia, trying to reshape one's body because they're discontent with what they have. That becomes a dangerous combination.
Yeah. I know it may not be your expertise or your focus, but how would you advise someone that um, might struggle with some of those issues? Let's say body dysmorphia, because I think that's rampant
Mhm.
in general. Like, that's almost what bodybuilding promotes in a sense of like to shape your body into something that you want it to,
Mhm.
right? Something that's
Mhm.
lacking or improving. Uh, like any like I said, yeah, maybe words of wisdom or advice to stay in a healthy mindset, even though the goal is to change one's body to achieve something.
Well, understanding that body dysmorphia means that when a person does not have a realistic view of their body as it is. So this would be that someone who is, say, thin by anybody's standards sees themselves as fat. That
Okay.
would be a body dysmorphia. So it is that a person, say, when they look in the mirror, they're seeing themselves almost as if they're looking at a funhouse mirror that is making them misshapen. So they go to the same mirror that you and I go to, but they see it as if they are misshapen. Whereas someone else might see kind of like, oh yeah, that's what I look like.
Mhm.
Or someone is like highly critical, like overly critical of their body, um, in ways that are not accurate,
Yeah.
you know. And those are really what we're looking at when we're looking at kind of a body dysmorphia. There's other pieces to that, but that's really so. Someone looking in the mirror, assessing accurately what's going on, and then working on those parts of their body to change them, or whatever. That's not a body dysmorphia if the image is correct, if the reflection and the work is correct. But you've got also these guys who are huge,
Hmm.
and they're looking in the mirror thinking they're not big enough. That's also a body dysphoria. So one of the things I think helps a lot if one is aware of that,
Hmm.
and awareness is of course the key word here. And people can have body dysmorphia and not be anywhere aware of that. But if they are aware of it, is to and want to do bodybuilding, they really should bring that conversation to their coach, if they have one, to their training partner, to other people who are willing to mention or hold them accountable,
I like
and
that.
just say, hey, and give them some realistic feedback, people that they trust,
Okay.
Who will monitor those things for them. What are the signs? What are the signals? What are the things that would happen if, what happens if they start to overtrain because they have the body dysmorphia and or become unhealthy in their eating habits, or any of these things that it could lead to. So getting some accountability and bringing community in is really helpful.
Yeah.
Can be really helpful.
I think that's like a really good thing to hit on, because I don't know about you, but I know in when I get deep into prep, you're almost in your own little mental cave. You're zoned in, you're locked in, and you really don't want, you have these blinders on. And like you said, to have someone on the outside, whether it's a coach, a loved one, that stays objective and can make sure, like, okay, well, hey, you're getting a little bit too agitated, or you're being a little whatever, and so saying those things. And then the community, like, I love the fact that we were able to connect, because going back to how few people actually compete, it's, I don't have anyone really here until recently that I've been able to kind of start a friendship with. So that's nice, and
Yeah. And you're so hitting on something that is key about the bodybuilding, is that, it really is an isolative sport. Most of what we do is in a gym, with headphones on or whatever, and and pumping the iron out. And the only time we all come together is during a competition, and we see each other and say hi for the 3 seconds we're on stage, and then boom, that's it. And so having a coach is great because of that. I do couples competitions. I've been in 2 couples competitions, and my couples partner, and I text each other quite a bit, especially when we're trying to avoid picking up another weight in the gym. We'll like text and say, and we'll check in with each other and stuff, and that's just been very helpful. And like, yeah, this is a harder day, or I'm really fatigued, or I'm irritable, or and just knowing that someone else is going through some of that same stuff, and even if we're not in the same gym, it does help to know. And I'm honest with her, and she's honest with me about what is happening currently in our lives that might be impacting this, and helping to give each other feedback to keep us from overdoing something, or not eating, or I think in our pre-talk we were talking about food guilt. If we're like, hey, if she's saying like, oh, I just want to dive into the carbs, or I grabbed a handful of nuts and it's not on my piece, and I'm like, and we just remind ourselves that, hey, this isn't what today is not the only day of this. This is a process that's over a period of time.
Yes.
And a handful of nuts today is not going to throw you all off. And if that becomes a pattern that you're eating the handful of nuts over days and days, maybe we've lost sight of the why.
Yeah.
But it balances out over the long haul.
So I want to go back to food guilt in a second, but it kind of made me think of a question for just like, let's say, general population that may see, the physiques that are in shape for contest prep, and that's all they're seeing, whether it's on, their feed from Instagram, Facebook, so on and so forth. Like, how can someone who doesn't have the interest of ever competing, maybe would you say that, to not get fixated on that look and create a fantasy, and something that it might turn into, like, again, body dysmorphia, because they're never able to achieve it, because didn't have the desire to do it, and not only that, but they don't really understand what it takes to get to that point, and that it's most of the time very short lived. We both know that you're not trying to stay that way, right? Like we don't want to be that way. So, you know.
Yeah, well, we kind of all hope that we would stay that way, but the fact is it's just not healthy.
Yeah.
And that we do have to, at some level, transition back to something, certainly something that was better than what we started with, but not nearly being at that, that lower amount of fat, percentage and stuff, because that's just, it's not sustainable. But the concern is, of course, that everyone takes their pictures then, as well as every person on TikTok and Instagram and all of those, everyone, takes their pictures and does all their stuff when they're in that shape. And the reality is that, one, it's not healthy to stay in that long term. And so finding that place where we can be sustainable and healthy is really the goal for off season, and that we can still build too. And that's a completely different body in some ways.
Yeah.
The body that builds eats differently, and the body that builds does things differently than the body that is in competition and depleted and fatigued. And
how much, because again, kind of like talking before we started recording, you said, I don't really have any clients that are bodybuilders and that have gone through that, but I'm curious on the physical aspect, because I know you have mentioned that trauma portrays or manifests physically. Do you encourage some of your clients to get physically active and and exercise and all that, and like how have you seen that impact their healing process on the other end? So
well, I always recommend exercise as to all my clients, really, as one of the things that they can do. Exercise, sleep, nutrition, water, all the sunshine, all the basics that we know. And because if a person can engage in the very basic things that we can do something about, it can really help the things that are harder to work through, the more emotional, psychological stuff. If we're not getting good enough sleep, then, and it's not restful, deep sleep like we need for being restored, we're going to be sleep deprived. And if we're sleep deprived, there's a whole bunch of really things that that will deplete our mental and psychological resources. So we work on that. And exercise. Exercise has the same effect on the brain as Prozac or Zoloft after a while, because it increases the serotonin levels. And so after 6 to 8 weeks, you start kicking into that good feeling. And oftentimes people feel really good once they're exercising the first couple of weeks, but for it to really develop the serotonin levels that we have, it takes 6 to 8 weeks of doing that, and then ongoing, of course, after that. And there is, I have to say that after a good exercise workout, it's pretty cool. The feeling that you get.
100%. Yeah, that's what I think. It's what us gym goers, or that's what's probably kept us in there so long for years after years. The as far as building your body physically, if you're broken mentally, is there something to that where it may be someone who is not in therapy, they may not have the means or the access to therapy? Is there something to the fact of saying, hey, I can build physically, and then hopefully that can translate into some mental healing as well? As I don't know, that's just something that came across my head now. I don't know.
Yeah, interesting. So I have two pieces. That one is that making movement anywhere in one's life can be a step towards the next step. Okay. So exercising can be the next step to the next exercise, which makes the person feel better, that allows them to take the next step to whatever that is. and or running or whatever, but also volunteering for to a soup kitchen,
Mm.
can be a step towards something else, and making and giving to a community, or connecting with friends and family. So everything's a step towards healing. And so, can it be? Yes, absolutely. And it does have a great impact on the body too.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think that the exercising can be key,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not the only thing. Just any kind of movement,
Okay.
any kind of movement in the person's life can be a building block to the next thing that will help them move towards healing.
So taking action in some sort of getting there.
Yeah. And the other thing, you used the word broken, and I like the image of grass that has been stepped on.
Okay.
Isn't broken, it's just bent over.
Okay.
And that's where resiliency is. The grass springs back. And I really like that image, that people who have had trauma experiences in their life have been trampled over or stepped on or whatever the image, and have the ability to come back.
I like that. Okay. I've never heard that. That's a great way to reframe how, one may feel, and instead of, like, I use the word broken, and words have a huge power, right? So if we, when you just reframe that, even.
Yeah. Pink has a song, and in it she says, "We're not broken, we're just bent."
Yeah.
I like that a lot.
It's, the power of words.
Yep.
So, I guess moving a little bit into, let's see, I had a question about transitioning from contest prep, getting out of this, isolation, this focus, intense focus, this regimen, and all of those things. How did you do it? One, and then two, is there a way that you think, kind of ripping off the Band-Aid is the best method type of thing, or slow, or it just depends on the person? So.
Yeah, so I've done it like 3 different ways for 3 different seasons, and probably none of them are all that good. So the first, the week after the competition, I ate, and my coach was gave me a plan about how I was going to ease back into regular eating and regular things, and not to have, so that my body would have a slow kind of recovery period and back.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that was the plan. I didn't binge eat through the week, but I was certainly not following the plan. I was like, really? And I'm a vegetarian, so I was on a lot of eggs. And so I widened my amount of food variety fairly quickly, and then I was eating more normal meals quicker. The second year, I was better at waiting out that time frame. But the harder part is that the competitions I'm in are in October and November, and then Thanksgiving comes along. So, when there's a pie there and you haven't had carb for, months and months, it's a little tough. And to allow oneself the pie without having the whole pie, is a little different. And this past competition season, I was able to come out of it, slower. I got to the place where I felt like I was sustainable, but still felt really good about the way I looked. And so I felt like I did a much better job of kind of easing out of that for the most part. And then about 2 months into it, I had gone on a vacation and stuff. And so I was a little more indulgent during that time. So I have to.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's part. It sounds like part of it was the willingness to experiment, but then also your experience level probably played a factor in that as well.
Yes. Knowing what was going to happen and what the impulses were and what that was going to look like,
Mm-hmm.
but also having a why. So, and I think this is like key to motivation for doing bodybuilding or anything, is you have to know why you're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I had mentioned in the first competition, my why was so that I had a great story and my nieces and nephews could say that they had an uncle who competed in a bodybuilding contest at 58. The second time, the second season, it was because I wanted to go to the world competition.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was my focus, that was my why. And I went to the, world competition in Seattle. And this past season, I went to the world competition again in Boston, because it was in Boston. So a number of the other people I know in the community of bodybuilding were going. And I was like, I wanted to go to support them, but I was like, since I'm there anyways. But there was a why for me coming out of the prep.
Okay.
And that was the piece that really helped me. So that instead of just all of a sudden being at Thanksgiving and indulging, and then Christmas and having cookies, I knew I was going to do a workshop, attend a workshop and visit a friend in Bali.
Okay.
In January. And I was like, I wanted to make sure that if I was going to be on the beaches in Bali,
yep.
that I was, I had a reasonably good shape, and I had, after all, I had worked for it.
Mm-hmm.
So I was able, because I had that why, to still enjoy Thanksgiving and Christmas, while also making, attending to my meal prep and my exercising in a way that was off season, but also got me to my why.
I'd love yes, I experienced the same thing this season as well. Funny that you mentioned the having something set up for you after the contest that you can not necessarily have to stay so rigid, but you still are going to have some, shape, like you said. And so I think that's a very wise recommendation for a lot of competitors, to set something else up that's going to keep them a little bit accountable, but allow them to have a little leeway there. So thank you, for mentioning that. Let's see here. I want to be respectful of time. Are we good? Because, okay. As far as, and this is again, I know there's maybe a caveat, but personality types that you may or may not suggest endeavor in the sport that, for bodybuilding, whether they're, kind of, or even if they've had some kind of experience in the past that could trigger something that they had, and like bodybuilding, like the stress of it, anything like that. How would you approach that?
So you're asking if bodybuilding might push some triggers?
If bodybuilding, rambling a little bit. Yeah, bodybuilding might push some triggers, and then if there's any personality types that are more suited for the sport or not. I don't know. It's just
Well, I think people with who are healthy are more suited for the sport.
Okay.
I mean, that would, or to make the healthier we are mentally, physically, socially, emotionally, coming into bodybuilding, the better that will be all around.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that bodybuilding is set up, like we said at the beginning, it has intrinsically parts of it that lend to or can attract people who aren't as healthy emotionally or psychologically, is the concern. Are there, and when we talked about some of the diagnoses that could potentially be more prone, like people with eating disorders or dysmorphic disorders, or even some OCD, or that can, and not that those are the only ones, but certainly those might be more prone to end up in bodybuilding, but in an unhealthy way. Because it is a lot mentally and physically, and the the healthier stance is I am doing this and I'm moving forward, and I can have a competitor's mindset, and I can be healthy enough to be self-reflective so that I am pushing but not over pushing, or not. I can be, if you will, compulsive, but over compulsive. I can be focused. Let's say focused instead, and that if I need to, that I can be healthy enough to say this is not the time. You know, there's the one thing about being a competitor and pushing and pushing and pushing, and there being a healthy, you know, but you know, we know of bodybuilders who've got injuries, and then still continued to do their trainings and such on top of their injuries, and now are permanently injured. I mean, this is, you know, not the kind of setup that we want to promote a healthy sport. And so all those things need to be thought of and considered, and hopefully have a trainer that can push you beyond where you are and such, but also say, wait, this is too much.
Right.
You know, you're in the overtraining place, or you're in the exercise addiction place, or exercise bulimia is another term that comes up when people are, you know, kind of exercising to get rid of the calories that they're eating.
That's interesting. Yeah. So like, if someone does do that, right? How is that? Is that mindset a negative one to have? Because I think that's pretty common, and not just in competitors. I think it's common in most people see, or not most people, but a lot of people will say, okay, I'm going to eat this because I know I'm going to be able to burn it off in the gym later. Where can someone have the knowledge to say, hey, okay, this is getting out of control. I need to stop doing this, or they shouldn't be doing it in the first place. That's because
I think as soon as you start asking the question about number of calories equals numbers of exercise or amount of exercise, I think that's a first hint, you know, that something may be clicking over, or you know, because really we should be looking like, am I eating the food I need to eat, you know, and in order to sustain what I want to be sustaining at this moment, you know, and that, you know, because sometimes that's eating less calories because we'll sustain a body fat loss in fat. But if the question is how many minutes on the elliptical do I have to do in order to eat this banana, you know, that's not necessarily a prep question. That could be an indication of something else going on there. Not that it always would be, but you know, things like that, when we start to trade off this and that, or try to cut down way quicker than we should, because you know, prep is about thoughtful, methodical steps in food reduction and exercise increases, so that you get to a certain place and you arrive there. You know, you might be fatigued, you might have all the other pieces that come along with it and such, but you arrive there because that's where your aim is. Not, I'm going to drop, you know, all this weight by not eating at all, and you know, just, you know, the body having this attack on it. And that's when we may be not in the health. And I use quotes around the word healthy, because reducing someone's body fat to something below what's good for the body is not necessarily healthy. We do it because of what we're trying to obtain for a period of time. But when someone is kind of crashing into that, or you know, withholding beyond what is kind of a prescribed slow, you know, arrival at the place, then I'd be concerned.
So would you go far as to say, or would you consider a contest prep almost a controlled kind of eating disorder, or that's a little bit too harsh of calling it that?
Yeah, I would, I wouldn't say it's a controlled eating disorder. It Because it is controlled.
Mm-hmm.
But the eating disorder is about the mindset behind it.
Okay. Oh, gotcha.
And
Fair. Okay.
yeah, so this arrival into that space
Mm-hmm.
is a planned arrival into that space. And we might arrive because we have a why that's about competing and stuff. If the why is about something that's spurred on by the eating disorder,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
then and what I would say is prep is a place where eating disorder can hide.
Okay. Is is food guilt, which is I think a little bit it's kind of a buzzword these days. Food guilt, and then also just having a healthy that goes with having a healthy relationship with food. Um, how can just not necessarily competitors, but people take steps to have a good association with food and not have this guilt associated with eating something that is deemed ultra processed or whatever because they just want to eat it because it tastes good to them, and that's okay. Like, we can eat food that tastes good because we enjoy it. How can people feel okay doing that?
Well, I think if you have food guilt, you want to look at where's that guilt coming from. What's the underlying reason that you're having the guilt and why it's coming up, and and if it's a pretty loud emotion that comes up and it's strong,
Mm-hmm.
then I really would be like, that might be a signal that you need some help, or you need to like there's something else going on, because eating itself should not be something that we feel guilty about.
Mm-hmm.
And so if there is some kind of guilt going on, it's worth looking at, because it may be our body telling us something, like this is too much food, or this isn't the right kind of food, or something. Our emotions are there to give us information. And so why am I feeling this guilt here? And what's going on? Oh, I'm feeling like I would just disappoint my coach,
Uh-huh.
if I eat this during prep.
Yeah.
And, that might be valid, in some ways. Does it lie on something in the past where, does this coach have an authority feel to them, and there's something else going on? Or is it just, they're putting in a lot of stuff and I need to put my own stuff in, and man, I can't keep myself away from that Snickers bar,
Yeah.
because I haven't had more than, X number of calories a day for the last 3 weeks. But I would say, really, if there is food guilt, just take a look at what that is. What's the body trying to tell you?
Okay.
And if you need some extra help with that, there are people out there who will help you.
Awesome. Thank you. And last question, what would you say to people thinking about the first time they're going to compete? The feelings of I know you mentioned having a strong why, but maybe some words of encouragement that you might give them to just try it out, see what throw their hat in the ring, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's lots of things that people can do on their bucket list if they want to, and this is, certainly that. And I certainly, it was a bucket list thing that has become, a really important part of my story, my overall story, and such. I really think that, if you have an idea that this is something you'd like to try, no matter what age you are, is to go ahead and do it. The first competition I was at, the one in the category I was in, one of the guys had lost 160 pounds.
Oh my goodness.
Okay,
That's
and he was on stage.
incredible.
Now yeah, and he was on stage, and he was, I mean, knew that he wasn't going to win.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I mean, I didn't even think I was going to win. I didn't even. I mean, I just want to be on stage and do this. So it's good. But 160 pounds. He lost 160 pounds, which I thought was just incredible. And he was up there in his spray tan and thong, and at whatever age he was, and he was definitely over 50 because he was in the over 50 category, and with this, just inspiring. I was so inspired by what kind of discipline and work he did to do that, and he should be up there, and he should be showing off the work that he's done, and and I just found that to be, um, something that I remembered a lot from that competition.
Yeah.
Was the stories behind all the people there that I met. One guy was in an accident. He was going to be in his first competition like 20 years before.
Oh.
He was in an accident that put him in a wheelchair.
Oh, wow.
And he ended up gaining a bunch of weight, and he didn't end up competing. He didn't end up competing there. And through the years, he didn't compete until finally he said, I've got to do something different. Mm-hmm. And he was able to work himself back, so he wasn't in the wheelchair anymore. He was going to the gym, and he came to celebrate that success that he had of moving and finally doing this competition 20 years later.
Yeah.
That he wanted to do, but the accident had gotten in the way. These are the stories that are the really cool. It's not just a bunch of people on stage who want to look good. It's a bunch of people who've done a ton of work and deserve to be up there and having a moment where they're like, I can feel comfortable in my body. Mm-hmm. And if, hopefully that's where they are, not like I need to be in front of everyone so I can compete and be the best. But, for this, especially the local shows, I can be here in front of you because I have done something that I am proud of. And I have found those stories among the bodybuilding contests to be the most inspiring. Certainly. More so than the people who win.
Yeah. I mean, it's a plastic trophy at the end of the day, right? I think the real trophy is what you develop mentally and, yes. How you grow in the whole sport. So certainly. Plans to compete in the future?
Yeah, I'm planning on at least doing the October local show that's here, and with my couples partner. So we are looking at music for our next routine.
Awesome.
And what that will look like. So I will compete, and we'll see how. By then, I may do a warm up show or two. Okay. Just because it's fun. And so yes, I'm planning on it, and we'll see what the year brings.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for jumping on. I appreciate your time. I hope to have you back at some point. First guest, excellent. Super honored to have you on here, and I don't know a way to say this other than I'm very, very much appreciative of your time. I know it's valuable, and I'm looking forward to continuing this friendship in the future.
Great pleasure, Daniel.